and heard about this thing called Common Core. So we decided to start doing some research, and what we found left us frustrated, mad, and wanting to change things. And that's why we're here tonight. Tonight, we hope to share with you, what we have found, encourage you to do your own research, and then also some positive action steps for how we can take back control. Now, we want to be very clear. We fully support our teachers and our school administrators. We trust our teachers to know how our children should be taught. But Common Core doesn't trust them. It has handcuffed the teachers that they have to either teach to the assessments and standards or lose their jobs. We want to put the control of education back in the hands of our teachers. Tonight we'll be giving you the highlights of this thing called the national standards called Common Core. How they were developed, how Ohio was bribed by $400 million to accept these standards before they even saw them, how it's changing education, and most importantly, what you can do about it. Before we can talk about what is wrong with the standards, we need to go back to their beginning. How we got the standards is reason enough why we should reject them. The Constitution of the United States and the 10th Amendment gives the right for deciding what is best for education to the individual states. Who knows better what your child needs than you, their parent, and their teachers? We set goals or standards for our students by electing people we trust to write those standards, so that we have someone to hold accountable when something is wrong with them. The State Board of Education was established in Ohio in the Ohio Constitution in 1953 to ensure that the citizens were given a voice in decisions relating to public education. Unfortunately, as we saw in the video, we were not allowed to have any such input. Dr. Sandra Statsky, who is credited with developing one of the country's strongest sets of academic K-12 standards, and she was also a member of the Common Core Validation Committee, but refused to sign off on those standards. In her testimony before the Ohio House on August 19th, she stated, Common Core standards did not emerge from a state-led process, and they were not written by nationally known experts. Both claims regularly made by its advocates. In fact, the people who wrote the standards were not qualified to draft K-12 standards at all. So let's take a look a little bit more at how they were written and who wrote them. Nancy Carlson Page from Lesley University in Cambridge, and also a senior advisor to Defending the Early Years. Defending the Early Years is a group that came together of over 500 early childhood educators and professionals. They came together to speak out against Common Core. They said the Common Core state standards do not comply with internationally and nationally recognized protocol for writing professional standards. They were written without due process, without transparency, and without participation by knowledgeable parties. According to Joy Kuhlman, who is a research fellow in education policy for the Heartland Institute, all the student standards, writings, and discussions were sealed by confidentiality agreements and held in private. Since this was not done through the traditional means, we have no right or ability to know how these were the standards that were decided upon. So what are the qualifications of the people who wrote the standards? Diane Ravitch is a former assistant education secretary, and she stated, altogether 24 people wrote the Common Core standards. None identified themselves as a classroom teacher. The largest representatives on the work groups were representatives from the testing industry. To further this point, and the impact that it will have on the classrooms, she went on to say that there was literally no one on the writing committee, with one possible exception, with any knowledge of how very young children learn. After the standards were written, they had one last hurdle, and that of the validation committee. The committee was supposed to be a check to make sure that the standards were all that they were claiming to be. Here's what happened. 5 of the 29 members of the Common Core Validation Committee refused to sign a report stating that they were research-based, rigorous, and internationally benchmarked. Only 3 of the members on this committee had extensive experience in writing standards. 2 of those 3 refused to sign off on the standards. The names of those 2 members are Dr. Stan Statsky and Dr. R. James Milgram. He was the only member of the validation committee who had a doctorate in mathematics. Now, despite the lack of qualifications of writers, why does it matter that the standards weren't written at the state level? Because we have no one to hold accountable. These standards are copyrighted, and Ohio doesn't hold the copyright, so we can't change them. And we are graciously allowed to add to them up to 15%. But that works out to be about 1 45-minute class a week. Now, proponents will argue that standards are not curriculum, and there is a big difference between the 2. However, let's look at what PARC, Ohio's federally funded and federally mandated testing consortium, had to say. In this press release, they stated that PARC states see quality assessments as part of instruction, not a break from it. This is what led Governor Bobby Jindal to sue the federal government because federally mandated curriculum is not allowed by law. On August 25th, he stated the proponents of Common Core and PARC continue to insist that tests and standards are not about curriculum, but that is a ruse. PARC may not mandate one textbook or one pacing guide, but the CEO of federally funded PARC has admitted one thing. PARC controls instruction, and instruction is curriculum. This is what happened when the federal government bribes states to adopt standards, then mandates that you must go with one of 2 testing options. The federal government effectively controls the education of your children. But more than the drastic federal overreach, there are problems with having one set of standards across the nation. Now, Common Core advocates will tell you that it adds more consistency, but there are some serious unintended consequences to having one set of standards for everyone. The first problem is a lack of competition between states. Zeev Werman, who is a former U.S. Department of Education official, he said, "I believe that the Common Core marks the cessation of educational standards improvements in the United States because no state has any reason left to aspire for first-rate standards. All states will be judged by the same mediocre national benchmark." When all the states must do the same thing, where is the motivation for innovation in teaching? Where is the motivation to make Ohio the best? The second problem with national standards is that because the vast majority of states have aligned, so now have the ACT and SAT score tests. This has 2 impacts. The first is no longer are they college preparation tests, testing students based upon what the colleges are looking for. Now, instead, they're testing based on what the high schools can produce. This is like if you are looking to hire someone. You want to be the one to write that job application, to write that job description, and then look for someone who can fill it. The new way is like looking at the pool of applicants and then making your job description based upon what's available. This will lead to a lower set of standards. As former U.S. Department of Education official Zeev Werman went on to explain, it used to be that the ACT could do what the colleges demanded of it. Suddenly, the ACT is going to do what the K-12 system demands of it. The second problem with the standardized tests aligning is that this means an immediate impact on homeschool and private school families. Not only have the ACT and SAT tests aligned, but so have the Iowa Basics and the GED. The writers of the GED explained that the reason that they decided to change their test was because the shift to Common Core standards is happening nationwide. This means that if you choose not to participate in public school and you choose not to teach your children the Common Core way, their ability to earn a GED and score well on an ACT or SAT and therefore get into college could be greatly affected. But beyond this is the most serious problem. The problem that Common Core standards are in fact going to make learning common. Now this is sold as a wonderful thing because now everybody will be the same. But as the Acton Institute put it, Common Core simply disregards the diversity of thought with which humans are created. God designs every person with unique qualities and gifts. And to shove children into one mold, you must learn in this way and at this pace, is to disregard this truth. To me, this is probably the biggest thing lost by Common Core. Diversity of thought is so valuable. It is what gave our founding fathers the idea to try this new thing called freedom. It's what spurred on Tesla and Edison to create this technological and electrical world that we live in today. And it is what enabled Martin Luther King Jr. to inspire a nation to change how we thought about each other. But without diversity in teaching, we lose out on diversity in thought. And that is simply not worth the risk.
Before I begin to talk about the concerns with the English language art standards, what is it that we want for our children in English? We want our children to be great readers, reading stories that emphasize the virtues and heroism found in classic time-tested literature. We want our children to love the English language and how it's used. We want them to have a strong vocabulary. We want them to have standards that foster true analytical thinking. Now let's take a look at the Common Core standards for English. The lead writers were David Coleman and Susan Pimentel, and both had never taught reading or English in K through 12 or at the college level. Neither has a doctorate in English nor published serious work on curriculum and instruction. We still don't know who one of these people as standard writers and why, because organizations that funded and developed these will not tell the public. These standards stress writing more than reading at every grade level, which is a serious imbalance and to the detriment of every subject in the curriculum. This is opposite of what an academically sound reading English curriculums do. 100 years of research show that successful reading English curriculum use deep intellectual reading to build foundations for good writing. With reading being crucial to every aspect of a thriving society, why subject our children to an experimental teaching method? Common Core expects English teachers to teach at least half of their reading instructional time on informational text, something they are not trained to teach, and is reducing literary study in the English class to less than 50%. English teachers are trained by college English departments and teacher preparation programs to teach the 4 major genres of literature: poetry, drama, fiction, and nonfiction, and the elements of rhetoric, not fragmented information on a variety of topics. Please note on this slide that K through 5 includes reading biographies and autobiographies. I will mention that a little bit later here. Question: how can you foster a love for reading when you're reading informational text? Great learners fall in love with reading not because of manuals, articles, and informational text, but because of fascinating stories. Reducing literary study in the English class not only cheats students of instructional time for learning how to read analytically, but also in effect retards college readiness. Also, under Common Core, cursive handwriting will no longer be taught. Well, with all the computers and the emailing and the texting, I guess there really isn't a need for cursive writing. But this means that students will no longer be able to read the journals of George Washington, or the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which we have up here. They were all written in cursive. And in fact, they won't even be able to read the letters that their grandparents and their great-grandparents have passed down in their family. So removing a student's ability to directly study American historical documents is just another reason why this is bad for our children and bad for our country. Common Core's writing standards are developmentally inappropriate at early grade levels. Dr. Sandra Stotsky, which we saw earlier, states this: while most adults know what claims, relative evidence, and academic arguments are, most children do not. They have a limited understanding of these concepts and find it difficult to compose an argument with claims and evidence. It would be difficult for children to do so even if Common Core's writing standards were linked to appropriate standards, but they are not. Now let's take a look at Appendix B, which is called Test Exemplars and Sample Performance Test, which is found at the end of the ELA standards. Appendix B consists of suggested books, portions of books, poems, and informational texts that serve as test exemplars. developed by the writers of the standards to help states choose text. There are many issues with Appendix B. I will list a few, but I encourage all of you to do your research on this section. We're going to start in the K1 standards under the poetry section. Let's look at a few of the authors. Langston Hughes, who wrote many poems, but the collected poems of Langston Hughes is on the kindergarten list. Please look up his biography and his list of works. He does not write poems for kindergartners. Some of his works include a poem called Goodbye Christ. We have copies of these too afterwards if you want to look at them. And a short story called The Way of the White Folks. Richard Wright is also on the same list with a poem called Laughing Boy. Please, again, look up his biography and what the theme he wrote about was. His biography states, Wright's frustration with American capitalism led him to join the Communist Party in 1932. He does not write poems for kindergartners. And just remember that slide I showed you before that stated that in kindergarten they are to be reading informational texts which include biographies and autobiographies. There you go. Now please note that some of these authors are then picked up again in 2nd and 3rd grade, 6th through 8th grade, and again in high school, which suggests that these are to be themes. As we started researching the books on the 9th through the 11th grade list, there were many of great concern. Books such as Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, which is a disturbing tale that includes a father raping his daughter. The crime not only occurs in the book, but is presented from the point of view of the father. It's graphically described and it is disgusting. Nora Zeeley Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Christina Garcia, Dreaming in Cuban. David Mitchell, Black Swan Green, where a 13-year-old boy gives a description of his father's genitals as well as his description of the sex act. We again have copies of these in the back, or actually in the front for you to look at. Most of the concerning sections we cannot read to you out loud because they are so offensive. The themes of these books and many others on the list are very inappropriate. They use vulgar language, dumbed down vocabulary. The section up here is actually from Their Eyes Were Watching God. Again, I recommend you look at it. Pornographic, sexually explicit content, pregnancy, abortion, anti-American, and racism. With Common Core demanding that teachers teach informational text from 50 to 70% of the time, the time-honored, character-building classics will be dropped because they take up larger blocks of time to teach. And in their place, offensive sexualized books such as Dreaming in Cuban will take over students' classrooms. Now, educational activist Donna Gardner states, such books are highly offensive to those who hold traditional values such as a belief in personal responsibility, self-discipline, and respect for other people. In addition, they also serve a purpose for those who are trying to indoctrinate this in future generations to hate America and to trash American exceptionalism. A steady diet of portraying ethnic racial characters as victims and saturating these books with gutter language is bound to warp students' minds. Now, you will see some good literature on the list too. To Kill a Mockingbird is on there. But how are teachers instructed to teach this classic piece of literature according to the standards? The example that we are going to show you is from a lesson created to support Common Core. This module, which these are being created to help teachers teach the material, is centered on To Kill a Mockingbird with the theme of how individuals demonstrate individuality in the face of outside pressures. The module includes 30 days of lessons associated with the novel and the multiple additional reading assignments that go with it. One of the short reading assignments that goes with this lesson is called The Mother of Monsters. Quick summary of the story is that a gentleman on vacation is introduced to the Mother of Monsters, a local oddity described as the peasant and the devil. Her story is that she finds herself pregnant while she is working as a simple serving girl. She binds her body with boards and cords to hide her growing belly. Her child is born horribly deformed. She takes care of the child but resents it until a sideshow man comes along and offers to buy the thing to pay a yearly stipend for its use. Once she realizes how much money she can make, she repeats her pregnancy pattern by birthing monster after monster of intentionally deformed children to sell to showmen. Now here's the writing assignment associated with this story. Write an essay that compares the cultural experience reflected in To Kill a Mockingbird and The Mother of Monsters and explain how this experience helped a character demonstrate individuality in the face of outside pressure. outside pressure and individuality? Seriously? This woman chose to deform her child for her own selfish gains and vanity. But to judge this woman as demonstrating her individuality in the face of outside pressure is absurd. What does this type of questioning lead to? And what kind of conclusion can you pull from this? If deforming your child in order to express your own individuality is acceptable, then what else is acceptable too? And do you see a pro-abortion message here? You will also see the Declaration of Independence the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution on the list as well. And that's good, right? We're going to show you a clip from a professor from Hillsdale College named Dr. Terrence Moore.
Being talked about is, it was said that the new and great thing about these new standards is that the Declaration of Independence is going to be read and the Constitution is going to be read. And Indiana wasn't reading those before. Well, I'm not sure if Indiana was or was not reading them before, but I know what the Common Core is doing with them. And you can look, it is true that the Declaration of Independence is going to be read according to these Common Core standards if you take Appendix B as an indication. But look at the question that's actually asked of the Declaration of Independence in Appendix B. It's a compare and contrast question, which is comparing the Declaration of Independence to the Olive Branch Petition. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I think Johnson once said that patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. I would say that compare and contrast is the last refuge of a standards maker. When you don't have something meaningful to say about the Declaration of Independence, you just willy-nilly compare it to another text, and you actually derive no real learning about what the Declaration is. How about the Constitution? How is that studied? Well, the Constitution itself is not recommended in Appendix B or in any other part of the Common Core standards. Through the 6th or the 8th grade, Amendment 1 is recommended for the 6th or 8th graders. Only Amendment 1, not Amendment 2, not Amendment 10, not Amendment 5. Why is that? In a solid curriculum, you would have students actually reading the Constitution by middle school. Even in the 11th to 12th grade reading band, in the high school, the full Constitution is not recommended, only the Bill of Rights. That's problematic because I would think that by high school you would at least have students reading the Bill of Rights. There is, however, in a section where not the Constitution is read, but rather a textbook on the Constitution is recommended. And that's a work that's published in 2005. What does this textbook do? Does it help us understand the Constitution? Does it tell us about federalism, checks and balances, the separation of powers, the rule of law, we the people? Not at all. It's a highly selected reading passage that has incendiary language on it that includes words such as vicious, master class, camouflaged, and ugly. So in other words, students' first encounter with the Constitution is going to be as this negative document that somehow was against many Americans who were in the United States, and they know nothing about the architecture of the actual Constitution and how it was set up. Why not actually read the Federalist Papers, for example? There's a literary text, if there ever was one, that's informational, and yet we don't have the Common Core directing us to Federalist 10 or Federalist 51. We have them directing us to a poorly explained, highly segmented example that's taken from a modern scholar with questionable language.
Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking that our schools would never choose these kind of books and materials for our children to read and study. I would agree with you. My question to you is this. Because the Common Core Standards Initiative ties teachers' evaluations and salaries to the scores their students make on the Common Core assessments, aren't teachers going to be pressured to teach the Common Core test exemplars and sample performance tasks in Appendix B? So what does this mean to you? As a parent, children not only do not become college and career ready, they don't even have a love for learning. They don't even have an understanding of their fellow men. That's quoted by Dr. Terrence Moore. Now, as parents, we should be concerned about the undermining of the morality of our children and at what reading level they will be at. And as a taxpayer, you should be concerned about how this type of socialistic and anti-Americanism will affect the voting of our future generation, and if those views will align with yours. As a citizen, what happens when the great American story, the story of freedom, is being undermined along with the other classics? What kind of society will we live in? As Plato once quoted, whoever controls the stories controls the society.
As we turn now to the math standards specifically, I want to look at it in a few different aspects. First, early childhood, their high school careers, and then finally, how this matters to you. The best place to figure out what the Common Core standards are teaching is to actually look at the standards. The problem with the standards is that we don't know how they will play out until they are interpreted through a curriculum. And since the Common Core standards were adopted without any field testing, despite being urged to twice by the Assistant Secretary of Education, we had no idea how the curriculum would interpret these standards. And so far, it's been nothing but confusing. One of the things that the Common Core standards require is a deeper understanding of numbers and math. Overall, standards want you to be able to know, understand, and explain multiple ways to get to an answer. This level of critical thinking sounds really good. However, but to teach this as the foundation to children who are not developmentally ready to be able to understand critical thinking, that leads to confusion. So let's take a look at a couple of standards here. This first standard is a second grade math standard. It says, explain why addition and subtraction strategies work. Well, that sounds fine enough. Let's see how it plays out when it's interpreted in the curriculum. Here's an example we have from a Pearson textbook. This gives a child 7 different ways to answer the simple question, and then asks them to come up with an 8th way and explain why that way works. This is for 7-year-olds. Have you ever been given driving directions by someone and they give you 3 or 4 different ways to get to their house? By the time they're done giving you the multiple directions, you're likely so confused that you're trying to decide if it's even worth going anymore. Well, that's what we see here. Here, they end up giving basically 7 possible ways to get to a solution, to get to the destination, and then ask the student to explain one more. Note too that the purpose of teaching and learning this way is not to discover the best way for the child to learn, but simply for the sake of learning multiple ways to do so. Some children, honestly, have a really good number sense. They can see a problem, and they know the answer just like that. Other people need to have different ways to look at it. This type of teaching, this type of standard does not allow for those mathematically gifted students to flourish. Here's another first grade standard. Understand, basically, to summarize, it says, understand that addition and subtraction are related. Great. Here's what it looks like on a first grade test. This is from an assessment that was given at the beginning of first grade. Question number 12. Which is the related, subtraction sentence? Now, never mind that the wording of this question is likely not to be understood by a 6 or a 7-year-old. The question is about subtraction, but all the answers only have to do with addition. This would be highly confusing. Some of you may be familiar with other similar problems of solving subtraction by addition, which seems to take and make a simple problem confusing and multi-step process. That comes from standards like this. Not only is this standard a clear indicator itself of how to teach addition and subtraction, but the writers of the math standards elaborate on the specifics in the progressions of Common Core math standards with pictures and details. Note the bottom here that says many children will attempt to count down for subtraction, but this is confusing and error-prone, so we're going to teach them to count up for subtraction. That leads to problems that look like this. This national standard is dictating the curriculum. When a student in South Dakota got a low grade for getting the correct answer the old way, her parents sent this letter in response to the uproar that it caused. In October of 2013, they said it is pointless to speak with the teacher about this. In fact, we love this teacher. We don't blame her. She is simply doing what the standards and curriculum require. But it has become distressingly apparent to us that all of us on the local level are and will continue to be powerless to affect any change in what our children are being taught and how they will be evaluated in math and language arts. And here again is one of the biggest fundamental problems with Common Core. The local school district and you as the parent do not have control over what your children are being taught. But aside from what the parents think about this new way of doing math, what do actual experts say about it? Because let's face it, just because something is new does not necessarily mean that it's bad. Common Core supporters will tell you that this way of teaching math is to foster critical thinking and a deeper level of understanding. Zeev Werman, former U.S. Department of Education official, he also served on California's Academic Content Standards Commission. He stated this: "Some seem to believe that it is easier to teach high-level critical thinking than it is to teach the standard algorithms with understanding. The standard algorithms for adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing whole numbers are the only rich, powerful, beautiful theorems that you can teach to elementary school kids. And to deny kids these theorems is to leave them unprepared. There will always be people who believe that you do not understand mathematics if you cannot write a coherent essay about how you solved a problem, thus driving future STEM students away from mathematics at an early age. The ability to communicate is not essential to mathematics." Now, we do see that the standard algorithm is taught, but not until after 4 years of learning addition and subtraction this way. This is again where we see that the Common Core standards are not developmentally appropriate. And why are they not developmentally appropriate? Because no one with any early childhood development background was on the committee. Nancy Carlson Page of Lesley University in Cambridge, and senior advisor to defending the early years, said this in regards to the Common Core standards, that they would lead to long hours of direct instruction, more standardized testing, and would crowd out highly important play-based learning. All of this has come to pass. Well, surely. Since we're going through all of this rigor and learning harder concepts at earlier ages, by the time we get to high school, we are going to have stellar math and sail right on past all of our international competitors. Sadly, this is not the case. Dr. James Milgram from Stanford University, who was also the only professional mathematician and expert on content review in the committee, and he has long been involved in writing K-12 standards. He refused to sign off on the Common Core. In his testimony before Indiana State Senate in January 2012, he said, "These standards are actually 2 or more years behind international expectations by 8th grade, and only fall farther behind as we talk about grades 8 through 12. Internationally benchmarked? I don't think so. One of the reasons for falling behind other nations is that the new Common Core standards delay teaching algebra until high school, instead of at the end of junior high, which has always been done before. This does not allow students to reach higher levels of math, such as calculus, in preparation for college while they're still in high school, because there simply isn't time. The other big problem with the high school standards is the way they're teaching geometry. It's an experiment. Again, to quote Dr. Milgram, "The biggest issue with the core standards is the lack of evidence." Now, this is largely true, but at least in math, there is significant international evidence that major parts of these standards will not work. Speaking specifically of the geometry standards, he said it was tried on a national scale in Russia, but was quickly dropped. So, what does this mean to you? Well, as a parent, this frustrating approach to math will lead to lower math grades, has not been tested, and will not prepare them for a 4-year college, only a 2-year community college. This has been attested to by the writers of the standards. This means more remedial courses, which you get to pay for, or actually lowering the standards of what qualifies as a college credit course. This is effectively how we dumb down our education system. As a private or homeschool parent, this means less curriculum choices for you. In addition to all of the standardized test aligning, we're also seeing major curriculum starting to align, such as Saxon Math. And the reason they're doing this is because they have a broader base to sell to if they align with the Common Core. As a member of society, this greatly impacts you as well. I know many of us have lamented in school that I will never use this math again, but we know that this isn't fully true. As a local engineer said when discussing the Common Core math, with students learning math this way, we won't have people to build bridges and buildings anymore. And if we do, they'll fall down.
Coming right along with Common Core is nationalized sex education. What do we want for our children to learn in sex education? We want our children to learn basic anatomy and to be taught the biology of reproduction at an appropriate age. We want to be able to determine when the appropriate time is for our children to learn about sex and to have it align with our value system. Now this right here is taken directly from the National Sexuality Education document under the introduction. I'm going to call it the NSES. The NSES were published in September of 2012, right when Common Core was being implemented. It is a federal program, and please note that the priority of this document is the implementation of sex education in U.S. public schools. Now also note in the introduction that the NSES were further informed by the Common Core standards for English language arts and mathematics, recently adopted by most states. Now, why is sexuality curriculum consulting English and math standards? And why is it consulting only Common Core English and math? As you can see here, they're tied together. This would explain why there are so many books in the English language arts standards that are sexually graphic and sexually inappropriate, and why math problems will bring out family structures and diversity. These standards were constructed to be fed into every aspect of the Common Core. We're going to show you another video clip from a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin. His name is Dr. Duke Pesta.
Is to make, because you know, we don't put 5-year-olds in a biology class. We don't have biology for 5-year-olds teaching sex. We don't put 6-year-olds into sex education classes. The only way we're going to get your kids to meet these standards is if we add to every single subject the Common Core teaches, we add sexuality component. Because you can't just, if these are standards that your kids are going to have to be tested on, you can't just do it 5 minutes once a week. And that's the plan of Common Core. Do you know there are already plans underway to make art, music, and gym Common Core plan? Gym class is going to have to conform to Common Core. Because this is about control. Let me show you what they do with your kids is they break your kids up into 3-year cycles. 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, test. 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, test. 11, 12, and 13-year-olds, and so on. Let me show you what they want your 5, 6, and 7. Now keep in mind, you don't teach your 5-year-olds about sex. So this raises a question, doesn't it? You don't teach your 5-year-olds about sex for a bunch of reasons. It's inappropriate, they're not old enough to process it, you want them to be children, but they're doing it. So what do? You ignore it, they win. You decide you're going to start teaching your kids your version of sexuality at age 5, well they win too because you're sexualizing your children. What do you do? And if it's a national standard, you can't opt out of it. And by the way, even if you want to opt out of it, how do you opt out of English class? You see what they've done? It's not a lesson or a time bomb. It's an entire curriculum now. How do you opt your kid out of English? Because English is the problem now. Not national sex, not sex ed. It's English that's the problem. And math that's the problem. And you can bet history and science will be the problem too. You have to get out of those.
So let's look at some of these standards. By the end of 2nd grade, students should be able to identify different kinds of family structures, demonstrate ways to show respect for different types of families. Now, we want our children to be respectful, but does this leave room for your family's own faith and own worldview? Let's look at some more examples. By the end of 2nd grade, describe differences and similarities in how boys and girls may be expected to act. Provide examples of how friends, family, media, society, and culture influence ways in which boys and girls think they should act. Now here, they have to be able to tell the difference between girls and boys, but let's look at their different definitions of gender. And there's 4 of them up here. There's gender expression, gender identity, gender roles. Just read some of these. Now, teaching transgender buzzwords and mentally processing the emotional responses that make boys boys and girls girls is not appropriate material to be taught to 5 to 7-year-olds. All these standards need to be looked at again by all of you here. We have copies in the back, and they are also available online to download. Please take the time to look at them. Now, these goals are taken directly from the standards under guiding values and principles. Please take a look at number 5 and number 8. Their whole idea here is to test them on what the standards are. They want to be able to test them on this. So, does this raise some questions here? To anybody? Now, you might say that this will never happen in Ohio, but it already is in other states. This is a poster that was hanging in the front of a classroom in Shawnee, Kansas, which is a very conservative area right in the Bible Belt. A 13-year-old girl took a picture of this with her cell phone and showed it to her dad. He, of course, called the school and discovered it was indeed part of their sex ed curriculum. When Ann Neal, a spokesperson for the Shawnee Mission School District, stated the curriculum is a part, this curriculum that it's a part of is aligns with the national standards around those topics, and it's part of our curriculum in the school district. She added that the approved curriculum is in keeping with what other schools around the country are doing as well. It's already here, people. This is the destruction of modesty and the removal of Judeo-Christian morals. The last thing I'm going to show you is a book that actually predates Common Core, but has been improved by Common Core and has its stamp on the back. This book is endorsed by Planned Parenthood and has been approved by the National Sex Ed Standards. This book is intended to teach kids 10 years of age and older about their growing bodies. I will not show you the pictures in this book because of the very graphic cartoon content. This book is available again to view online, and we have copies to look at as well. My question to you is this: whose values and whose principles are being taught? And what happens if your view of sexuality is different than these standards? How do you fight a national standard? And what does this mean to you? As a parent, these standards are undermining parental authority, undermining family values and beliefs, and innocence is being lost at very young ages. As parents, you don't get to decide what is taught and when. And this has been shown to be extremely harmful to a child's mental health. As a taxpayer, why should you pay attention to these standards? These standards are normalizing premarital sex, homosexuality, redefining abstinence, teen pregnancy, and abortions. Who are abortion and STD treatments funded by? Taxpayers. And finally, as a citizen, why should you pay attention? The purpose of these standards is to break down the moral or ethical distinction between anything. It is the moral degradation of our society.
Now, with No Child Left Behind came a whole new look at standardized testing. We were introduced to something called high-stakes testing, and lots of it. From the 3rd through 8th grades, students were assessed mostly in English and math, and their teachers were evaluated based on how well students did on this one test. Students were allowed to go on to the next grade or not based upon one test. Almost no one would agree that this type of high-stakes testing is a good thing for education. And yet, under Common Core, what we see is not only a continuation, but actually an increase of this testing. First, let's take a look at what PARC, the Ohio federally funded and federally mandated testing consortium, had to say. They're adding another test. They have 2 tests that they're going to be doing every year. The performance-based assessment will be administered about 3/4 of the way through the year. And then they also have an end-of-year assessment, which will happen at the end of the year. So now at least twice a year, the students will be receiving these high-stakes tests and missing out on valuable teaching and learning time. Additionally, as more Common Core standards are written, more areas will have to be tested. So soon the high-stakes testing will also begin to test science, history, and social studies, which will make these tests longer. Assessments will begin earlier than the 3rd grade as well, and they will continue into high school. From the Dayton City schools right here in Ohio, we see on their website, today's kindergarten students will be the first students to take the new Common Core assessments. Today's middle school students will have to pass Common Core assessments in order to graduate from high school. Now, in theory, Testing children in kindergarten and every year after that has some merit. We want to know how our children are doing. We want to give the teachers information of who needs help and where they need help. But when we actually see this play out, it's not been so helpful. It's been more stressful and confusing. This started last year in the state of New York when kindergartners used these assessments. A New York teacher reported this. They, the kindergartners, don't know how to hold pencils. They don't know their letters yet. And yet they're being asked to bubble answers A, B, C, or D. They don't understand. They break down, they cry. Many years of studies show that multiple choice questions are not developmentally appropriate for children under the ages of 8 to 9. And yet now it will be a multiple time year thing from their first year to their last. Similarly, other schools in New York saw a rise of stress reactions to the test, and not just in kindergarten, but in the older grades as well. Things that led schools to contact the testing company and ask how they should handle the tests that had vomit all over them. Now, I'm not saying that we should never test our children, and I'm certainly not saying that we should make life and school as stress-free as possible. That is not realistic, and nor is it actually helpful. But what I would say is that we should not be asking students to take on more stress than they can realistically and developmentally handle. To do that is setting them up for failure. One of the other aspects to testing is this, the cost. Now, all testing must be done online, which means that there are infrastructure and technological improvements that must be done, not to facilitate child learning, but to test them. The costs are huge. The cost per student, according to Park, is about $30 per student. Now, since that figure was given, many states have dropped out of Park, which means that while the cost of developing the test has remained the same, the states sharing that cost has decreased. But more than just the cost of purchasing the tests, there are developmental, technological, and maintenance costs that also have to be accounted for. This study from the Pioneer Institute breaks down the costs from all the areas that will need to be funded. It's not just the $29.50 per student that Park says. First, we have the multi-year technology costs. We also have textbooks and material costs. And finally, professional development costs. All of those add up to about $575 million for the state of Ohio, with $300 million of that being in recurring annual costs. That is a lot of money, and it gets to come from you. Now, with all of this testing, they're going to be gleaning a lot of information from our students. And it's not going to be just their first, last name, and whether they know that 2 + 2 = 4. They want 400 points of data on every student. And what they're going to be doing with that data is what Jenny will talk about next.
Before I talk about that, what do parents want when it comes to their child's personal and educational data? We want our child and our family's information to be private and not freely shared with outside entities. We as parents want control over this information. Now, every state that agreed to Common Core in order to receive Race to the Top funding committed to design, develop, and implement statewide P20, which is preschool through workforce, longitudinal data systems. The comprehensive statewide longitudinal data systems employed by Common Core will hold this sensitive data on your child and your family. Now, in 2012, the U.S. Department of Labor announced $12 million in grants for states to build longitudinal data systems linking workforce and education data. Through Common Core, it is designed to work to develop human capital. Now, in fact, buried in all the fine print of Common Core standards is a provision that allows participating school districts to ignore HIPAA protections. The Department of Education actually altered the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, called FERPA. They actually altered it. Now, FERPA formally guaranteed that parents could access the data collected by schools concerning their children, but it barred schools from sharing this information to third parties. The newly revised FERPA laws grants school districts and states HIPAA privacy waivers. Now, In summary, Common Core does the following by law. It allows the following by law. It grants school districts a waiver from FERPA in terms of deleting personal information on their records. It allows school districts to then give these personal records basically to anyone who they deem to have a viable interest in these records. Now, these organizations or individuals chosen by the government to use this data to develop highly accurate predictive tests with no stated ethical procedures, guidelines, or institutional controls. And this is all being done without parental consent. Also important to note that FERPA does not currently protect homeschooling families in states where families must submit documentation of intent to homeschool. So at a national conference on student assessment in 2011, the Data Coordinating Council recommended that this data system would now have to include students not included, like homeschoolers, in the system. So this is, their intent is to include everyone. In February of 2013, the Department of Education created this document up here, which analyzed how to record any factors that might affect educational success, including socioeconomic background, classroom climate, personal goals, and emotions during homework assignments. The study recommends that facial expression cameras should be used, posture analysis seats, pressure computer mics, even eye tracking devices. Also computer programs to track a student's mood, all to be used in schools. Now we see keeping tabs on our child's emotion goes right along with the Common Core standards that we've seen so far. This should bring up many questions to us. What are they going to do with all this data? Well, we know one thing they're going to do with it. Remember David Coleman, president of the College Board? Well, Time magazine says this about Coleman. His quiet work behind the scenes on the proposed Common Core standards makes him among the most influential figures in American education today. David Coleman gives us an example of how private information can be used in sophisticated ways to advance progressive causes. He is quoted here talking about the people who helped with the Obama campaign. He says, "The person who led the Obama campaign's use of data to galvanize a generation of low-income people to vote like they never had before. Whether you are a Republican or Democrat, the simple precision and excellence of the use of information to achieve a result is something in my mind that deserves astonishment." That's directly quoted from David Coleman. Well, that's not how I want my private information being used, and I definitely don't want this information being collected through my children. How does privacy issues with Common Core affect you as a taxpayer? How much do you think all this data monitoring equipment will cost? How about the huge storage facilities that they are building to store all this data? Who pays for that? This is a picture of a data collection center in Utah. Note the sign on the front, "Welcome to the Utah Data Center. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." Now, as a parent, this is very concerning. There is a huge loss of family privacy, there's loss of freedom, and most importantly, it is intrusive to the child without our permission. What will our society be like when everyone has a track record of everything from childhood? And how free will we be? To wrap things up here tonight, we would like to show you some numbers from the Ohio Department of Education's website on Ohio school funding. The first chart shows Dover City School District's enrollment from '94 to 2012. And as you can see, enrollment's been down since '94. Now the next chart shows per pupil operating costs, expenditures, from the mid-'90s to now. And there is an increase by $4,000 per pupil, and that's with enrollment being down. That's roughly $8,000 to $9,000 per student per year. And what if you have 3 children in your family, like my husband and I do? You're looking at $25,000 a year for their education. That's a lot of money, right? My question to you tonight is, how do we want that money being spent? Is what we showed you tonight the kind of education you want your tax dollars going to? Because it's not the government's money, it's the taxpayers. I think we can all see here that more money doesn't equal a better education. And a better education is what we want for our children, because their education is the foundation for the future of our families, our state, and our nation. And we will end with this.
Like since, evolved the idea that you and I have within ourselves the God-given right and the ability to determine our own destiny. But freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Those are some wise words. This country was founded by men and women who love their country and their creator. 400 years ago, our forefathers left the oppression of another land to build this one. And right now, young men and women are dying in foreign lands to preserve the freedoms that we enjoy every single day. It's easy to put our heads in the sand and ignore what's happening, to get caught up in our busy schedules. But our rights are being destroyed and we're letting it happen. So wake up. We can't be silent about this anymore. It has to stop tonight. The Constitution of the State of Ohio's preamble states this: we, the people of the State of Ohio, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom to secure its blessings and to promote our common welfare, do establish this Constitution. And under this Constitution, it states this: all power, all political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their equal protection and benefit. The people have the right to assemble together in a peaceable manner, to consult for the common good, and to instruct their representatives. Now, our purpose of this meeting tonight was not to instill fear in your hearts, but instead to open your eyes to what is already here, what is coming, and more importantly, what we can do about it. Because we can determine our own destiny. And like we just heard, the only way our children can inherit the freedoms that we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, and defend it. So how do we do that? We educate ourselves. Knowledge is power. We educate others and we tell them about what we're learning. There's an option too available to us to opt our children out of the testing, and we have the opt-out forms here tonight. Most importantly, we call our state reps and our senator and we tell them to stop Common Core and park testing in Ohio. We are very excited to have State Representative Andy Thompson from Marietta District 95 here tonight, and he'll be telling us about House Bill 597, the smart exit strategy from Common Core. Before we bring him up here, you will have an opportunity to ask questions and make comments as soon as Mr. Thompson is finished speaking. We will set aside about a half an hour for questions and then close for the evening. If you still have more questions, well, obviously we'll be here for that. Don't forget to pick up additional resources which are available on the tables when you walked in. And there's also a great book out there called 4 Centuries of American Education, which examines education both past and present and shows proof for what long made America a world leader in education. They are available for you to purchase too. And on that note, please welcome State Representative Andy Thompson.
Well, that was an excellent presentation, and I've heard a few presentations. You see some film that was from the Notre Dame Forum that was one of the first that I got to go to. And I think that I was really, I've been impressed, and even as we did the hearings recently, I learned a lot that I didn't know, frankly, about how we got ourselves into this mess. And I understand the kind of the big picture, but it's very troubling when you think about folks operating with your tax dollars, including our Department of Education, and how they implemented things in the state of Ohio, really without a shot being fired or any real consultation, as we talked about, with teachers and people who really experience education at the grassroots level. And education has been a series of fads over time with an increasing federal role, going back to early 1965 with the Elementary Secondary Education Act. Federal dollars starting to creep into our state, and with it, the strings and the attachment that go with it. And now ultimately a State Department of Education which operates very much on federal dollars. To whom do you think they're accountable? To the taxpayers of Ohio or to the people who are sending them checks from Washington, D.C.? So it's a real concern. And as we held hearings on House Bill 597, the Department of Education declined to testify. Now, it's really hard to get answers when you decline to testify. I'm sure they may have been in the background providing talking points to the opponents of our bill. And we had, a long list of opponents with virtually the same talking points in every piece of testimony that we heard, which was disappointing because I was hoping there would be something, some revelation that they would tell us something that we hadn't considered or hadn't thought. It was very much boilerplate standard stuff. These are great standards, they're internationally benchmarked. They have a lot of rigor in them. They're going to make teaching wonderful. Kids are going to really like this. So we haven't found any of their talking points to have been true. And we've disproven them. But you see them replicated now in the editorial boards across the state of Ohio. And that's also disappointing because the media were given a special protection, as you know, under our Constitution, so that they would do the job of scrutinizing the work of legislators and the work of other people in public life. I think we have seen an ultimate failure there, and it's disappointing that we can't, with cattle prod or whatever else we have, get them to take this seriously and listen to the concerns of people. So, how did I get to this point? I originally heard about Common Core from a teacher in my district. I don't know if she voted for me, she's not the same party as I am, but she had concerns that she shared with me, and when I went to our education liaison in the Ohio House, I was told, Common Core is really not a problem. Here's a list of talking points. You can give these to whoever had that question, and then and just let them know that everything's fine, and don't concern yourself. I shared that with some other people who had concerns that I trusted, and they said, Andy, this is a joke. It is a problem. It is a concern. It is valid. It is changing the way teaching is being done. It is changing the curriculum that's in the classroom. It is dumbing things down. And so I went about the process of educating myself independent of the supposedly the people who knew education best in our Republican caucus. And what I found continued to disturb me further. And at that point, we talked about introducing the bill. And the first bill that we introduced was House Bill 237. You may have heard that number because it was talked about widely and denounced by those in Columbus. The person who was our education chairman denounced my bill before I even got to offer my initial testimony. So you knew right away that there was not going to be a good reception. That had the effect of encouraging people in the education committee to really not take it that seriously. We had my sponsored testimony. We had a subsequent hearing, which was cut short after 2 hours so that the other side could tell everybody why my bill was terrible. And my witnesses were interrupted and treated very rudely. Some of the experts that you've seen on the screen here, Sandra Stotsky, James Mogan was not able to be there, but Zed Verman was there. So we had some of the finest people who understand education, who are experts in education, and they were treated with contempt by the chairman, which was very unfortunate. But it taught me a little bit about how aggressively the implementers of Common Core have gone about this. And in the state of Ohio, they've done a very effective job of buying off anybody who would have been the natural opposition. School choice groups got money, the teachers' unions got money, of course the Department of Education got money from the Gates Foundation and also from other folks who were interested in the outcome in Ohio. If you think about Ohio and the presidential stakes, it's one of the most important states. Even though we've lost population, it is one of those determining factors in every presidential election. I don't think they could let Ohio escape Common Core if they wanted to successfully implement it across the nation. And Ohio, under our previous governor, was willing to do that. The legislature didn't get a chance to speak on Common Core. If you look at it across the nation, it was really a deliberate attempt to circumvent any kind of legislative input or action on Common Core. So we got something that was implemented with the blessing of the State Board of Education and the governor and the state superintendent and their signatures. So not a lot of diverse opinion there, not a lot of input, not a lot of a chance for people to question what was going on. And so I, as somebody who was elected in 2010, come onto this stage, and really for 2 years didn't know anything about this. It was not until I heard about this from Noble County. I sit on the Education Committee and have been since 2011. I didn't know anything about it. Our Speaker Pro Tem, who sat on education committees 2 years or 4 years previous to my tenure there, didn't really know what was going on. So what you find out is a deliberate attempt for a stealth program it gets implemented without any oversight, and then when you finally do find out about it, and you want to have public hearings, they tell you, we're too far down the road. We spent too much money on this. And somebody was saying to me today, if you found out that you built your house and it had lead all over it, are you going to still live in that house because you're so far down the road and you paid for it? No, you're going to tear that out. And you're going to make sure that you're living in a healthy climate for your family. House Bill 597 is about restoring that healthy climate to Ohio. And in a sense, it's about reclaiming local control that has been lost over time. Again, when your State Department of Education is pretty much a wholly funded subsidiary of the federal government, it's really hard for local people's input to matter, for even our state legislators' input to matter, and for people who really care about education to matter. To whom do you appeal when you're part of a national consortium? How do you get real impact? How do you get real input when it's controlled by people in Washington, D.C. in a semi-secret society with confidentiality agreements which don't allow them to talk about what went on? Doesn't it sound like freedom, opportunity, a constitutional system? It seems as though some folks are maybe a little more equal than others in our society, and those who have the checkbook get to determine the outcome, and that's very unfortunate. Probably the most disturbing thing is when a corporate person combines their power with the power of government to compel us to do things, when we get a very unfortunate outcome. And so this is, again, I'm giving you a large preamble, but to try to understand the context in which this bill is done. So, we had House Bill 237. It was languishing in Education Committee without any additional hearings. My understanding is the Speaker of the House asked the Education Committee Chairman to have more hearings, and he declined. He, by the way, is in the Common Core Hall of Fame. If you go to the website of Jeb Bush, you can see pictures of our chairman and also Peggy Lehner in the Senate and Bill Cole as well. So we have some folks who are really much in the House, per se, very much beloved by the folks who are trying to implement Common Core, and they're the folks here in Ohio who have been an obstacle to the attempts of citizens at the grassroots to really make a difference. And so, introduced 237, it was languishing in committee, and this summer, in June, in the wake of some of the primary elections, which were very determinative and very illuminating, many of the candidates who ran on the Republican side of the primary, their number one issue was Common Core. So that was very instructive to people because they had heard from their constituents. We had one representative who was a colleague of mine, and he lost his seat down in Cincinnati. The number one issue in that race was Common Core. And while I feel sorry that he lost his seat, again, there were many attempts to try and encourage him to take this seriously and to talk about it. And he felt that he did not want to take a position on this. And ultimately, that was an electoral outcome that was influenced strongly by Common Core and by people's concerns. Because some of the folks who've been the biggest leaders in Common Core were in the Southwest Ohio area, and they've been very helpful to me. So in June, I was approached by our Speaker Pro Tem, and he said, Andy, we're going to repeal Common Core in the Ohio House, and I would like your help. We'd like you to have a bill that the Speaker has said we would like for you to have a bill that you think is the right bill for Ohio. It may require you to make some modifications to your bill, but it gives us a chance to reintroduce this and get a second look at it. We will have action taken in the Rules Committee, and that will provide a different path forward, which avoids the problem of the Education Committee that we have currently. So, so I set about working on this bill, and worked with one of the leaders of Ohioans Against Common Core, who's named Heidi Huber. Her name might be familiar to some of you if you're online, and you can go to ohioansagainstcommoncore.com if you'd like to learn more about what that group is doing. But I was working in concert with Heidi and the Speaker Pro Tem, and then also some of the other people that you've heard about this evening. Sandra Stotsky was very much involved in helping us construct this bill, talking about the standards that would be appropriate. Massachusetts, for those of you who didn't know, went from the middle of the pack in the 90s to number one in the nation in the late 90s and 2000s by virtue of the quality of the standards that they had constructed. And they had teacher input, they had parental input, they had college educator input. So they came up with a product that was not only touted as good, it proved to be good. It had excellent results. And so what my bill does is it repeals the Common Core state standards, puts in place the Massachusetts standards for a 3-year period, and then Ohio will go about writing its own standards. And my guess is they will be informed by the Massachusetts standards because they are excellent and they have had proven results. We didn't want to go back to Ohio's current standards because there was general consensus that they had some problems. But these Massachusetts standards, I feel very confident, knowing Sandra Stotsky as well as I do and how well informed she is on education. By the way, when she came and testified in Columbus, the other side threw everything they could at her. She was kind of like watching Yoda and the Star Wars movies. They could not contend with her because she knows what she's doing. She's not, these aren't talking points for her. This is her life. And she has a track record that is outstanding. And that's who I want helping me and helping other legislators at our state school board to arrive at a good conclusion. We want somebody who knows what they've done and they've got a track record, and they're not afraid to go to 50 states and talk about this because they want to help other states get it right. And that's what we're working on 597. So repeals the common core state standards and the park assessments. Park assessments, which we've talked about here, extremely expensive. We don't have any idea what those are going to cost. They don't give us an estimate. I've asked Josh Mandel to see if we can try to work on this issue to get us some good answers, because again, the Department of Education will not testify. Southern Massachusetts standards for 3 years. Ohio will write their new standards. And then once we have those standards as they are written for Ohio, we will have a review process. We appoint, in effect, a committee of the House, Senate, and a governor's representative to review these standards and kind of have input on them as well. And then the House will have a process whereby we will pass a resolution in support if we think that these standards are appropriate. That's what was lacking this entire time, is I told you at the inception. We didn't have any input from the legislature. Frankly, as you know, we adopted the standards before we even knew what the final standards were because we wanted that stimulus money. So this bill, and I don't want to take up too much time because I know that it's the evening will get late in a hurry, but I just want you to be reassured that I have worked to inform myself, I have worked to inform my colleagues, but again, I think it helps to hear from the real people, the grassroots. Hear from people who have informed themselves because they've learned more about this. I want you all to become those people as well so you can help inform your legislators and help them understand why this is a concern. I can understand why school boards and superintendents would be concerned about this. We were already 4 years down the road, we've spent this money. But if you are headed in the wrong direction, you need to reconsider that. And it may be embarrassing to think that we've spent all this money without ever having asked anybody who actually had real education and expertise to construct these standards. And to have something that might have been tested somewhere. Roll it out on the road. It's like even the Rolling Stones don't tour at age 85 before they have a few practice sessions and they see whether it's going to work out this time. So we need to be honest about this. We need to have something that's tested and proven before you unleash it on 45 states, even if you do have a large checkbook. So again, those are kind of the basic tenets of my bill. We're glad to get you copies of that bill. I don't believe it's posted online because it hasn't passed out of committee. But we'd be glad to get more information for you on this. I know we've got other speakers tonight. I will be around for more questions. I welcome those, and I welcome anybody who would like to get engaged in this process, whether you're a state legislator like my colleague Al Landis, or anyone else here who wants to get better informed and get active on this. Because today I was getting up and I was getting ready, and I had a woman call me, a mom from my district. She's the head of the Chamber of Commerce locally, and she said, Andy, how do we get this crap I call Common Core out of our schools? And I said, get informed and get active. That's what we've got to do. And the grassroots, sometimes politicians are late to the picnic. I don't care, as long as they get on board and we figure out how we do. We strip out the lead paint and we put something in place that Ohioans can be proud of, and that children and teachers. We didn't talk as much about teachers too. This has really destroyed the teaching profession because there's no joy in it anymore. It's taken away. Time is dedicated almost solely to preparing kids for tests and trying to grasp and absorb these standards. My wife is a Spanish teacher. She was working on student learning objectives when I left tonight. And there's even standards in Spanish, which are kind of informed by Common Core principles as well. So it's not, it's not just English language arts and math, it's everywhere. And so I will be replacing the standards, history, language arts. It's not just English language arts and math that we're fixing with Massachusetts standards. We have some of the other subject areas as well. And again, I think that that's important for us to have a clean slate, move forward, create something that makes sense for Ohio, and has the blessing of not just education bureaucrats and so-called experts, with the real parents who are going to have to help their kids with math, English, and everything else. If you lose that parental input, participation, and connection, you're going to have failure. And I'm afraid that's another thing that Common Core does. It really eliminates that parental-child bond by making things confusing and unintelligible. So thank you very much. Expert. She's attended probably more state board meetings than most people in the state of Ohio, so thank you very much, Melanie.
Thank you so much for coming tonight and learning. I hope all of you have appreciated the fact that they have really done the best job I've ever seen in looking inside the box, taking off the wrapping paper and taking a look inside. And that's what policymakers need to do. That's what we need to do in assisting them to understand the issues. I have attended State Board of Education meetings since '92, so 22 years. I will tell you that education policy in Ohio has not improved in the last 22 years. In fact, if I could just take 2 minutes to show some examples up on screen, if you could pull up the historical assessment. And the reason why I'm doing this is because in all of the discussion about Common Core, it's very important to understand that the assessments drive the system. And we are in a standards-based or an outcome-based model, and we have been since the mid-90s. What saddened me in terms of the testimony, because I was in the room when the opposition testified, those who were opposing 597, the proponents of Common Core, and so often when an administrator or a teacher, whom I greatly respect in terms of the profession and what their intentions are in the classroom, but they would get up and they would say, I've been a teacher for 15 years, or I've been an administrator for 15, or I've been an educator for the last 20 years. And it dawned on me in listening to their testimonies that they don't have a frame of reference to what Ohio was doing when the system worked. Because the entire time they have been in the profession, it's been in the wrong model. If we could pull up the one that says Ohio Assessments Historical Data, I'm just going to show you a few slides. It'll take 2 minutes. The first sheet here is a transcript, and I was in the room in 1994 when they were discussing setting the score standards for the first time for the 4th grade proficiency test. This is a conversation that ensued from a resolution that was offered by Virgil Brown. He was an elected member to the board, and he was discouraged by the fact that the Department of Education was recommending that 50% be the cutoff score for 4th grade to say that child was proficient. Basically, his perspective, he wasn't an educator, he was a lawyer, judge, an attorney, legal profession. He said, when I was in school, 50 was an F. So why are we telling parents that 50% is proficient? So he offered a resolution to raise the bar to 70%. In the context of that conversation, this next page, our state superintendent, Ted Sanders, gave the following statement that's underlined in the middle of the page. He said, if we are forced in the future in the developmental work to make sure we have percentage scores that are at and or above 70%, means we will have to reframe the whole approach we use in test development to make sure we have sufficient items that are of lower difficulty. Do you all get that? If we're going to raise the bar, we're going to put stupid questions on the test. This is very critical to understand. There are only 2 types of tests on the planet when it comes to evaluating what children know. Criterion referenced, norm referenced. The use of the term standardized can be used either domain or either genre. Standardized just means you're implementing the assessment in a standardized fashion. It's very scripted. Norm referenced was what I took in school, and many of you may have as well. The Iowa Test of Basic Skills, the California Achievement Test, and I'm going to show you some examples of actual test questions from state assessments here in Ohio compared to the Iowa Test of Basic Skills from 1964. Next page. This is an actual test page from an Ohio test in the mid-90s. M stands for mathematics. This was 9th grade math. This was after Dr. Sanders, our state superintendent, said if we're going to raise the bar, we're going to put lower questions on the test of lower difficulty. The question 41 for 9th graders, how long is a new standard size pencil? Is it 7 inches, 7 pounds, 7 yards, or 7 ounces? 9th grade math. A little bit down the page, there's a thermometer question. The 9th graders are expected to read the thermometer. Next page would be a page from the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. There's a thermometer question. And if you scroll down, it's not 9th grade, it'll say 4th grade, right there where it says the stop sign. Grade 4, stop here. So the thermometer question from the 1960s ended up moving from 4th grade to a 9th grade test in the mid-90s. The next page, it has a question number, a little bit more, there. 29, how much does a 2-week-old baby bird weigh? Is it 1 ounce, 6 ounces, 9 ounces, or 16 ounces? That's similar to the pencil question, only they're not blending weights and lineage. But this is not a random guess on how much this baby bird weighs. The 4th grade student, the 9-year-old, is expected to read the line graph above the question. So it's a mathematics question. Going down. 9th grade citizenship. Locate the map on the map where the capital of the United States is. 9th grade. Scroll on down. Keep going. Okay, stop. Citizenship. This is an action. These are not sample questions. There was a man who was a potato farmer in Salem, Ohio, sued the state so that his lawsuit went to the Supreme Court and made these test questions open public record. So these are actual test pages. Miss Berger runs a pretzel factory. This is 4th grade in the mid-90s. Which of the following does she need to make pretzels, fruit, flour, or frosting? If I'm 9 years old and I've been to the mall and I like Annie Ann's, and my favorite pretzel is chocolate covered, I'm going to say frosting. If I like the blueberry pretzel, I'm going to say fruit. And this is the very important concept to see. On a criterion referenced test, the person creating the test decides the questions and what the right and wrong answers are. We are still seeing that today with the park. It won't matter if you're testing in a subject area that should be objective like mathematics. They will embed the soft skills into those test questions. They've already said that's what they're going to do. Our Department of Ed staff has already said that's what they're going to do. Scroll on down. Just keep going. This is a reading selection, 6th grade in the mid-2000s. You can see the type of print that there were 5 questions on that reading selection. Stop. This is the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, 6th grade in 1964. It's a piece of historical fiction. And keep scrolling down. There are 19 questions on that short. Does any of you remember taking these types of tests? Okay. When we had norm referenced assessments, did we spend weeks after week after week after week preparing? No. You had 2, maybe 3 days of testing per year done. You didn't teach to the test. You didn't conform everything you did in the classroom to that assessment. You certainly didn't base a teacher's salary and credentials on how her children did on that assessment. Now, when I was a teacher in Portage County, and I was a special ed teacher, and we gave the California Achievement Test, we would get back a diagnostic profile on that assessment, and it was a norm-referenced assessment. We could get a diagnostic profile where the questions were clustered, and we could determine where the strengths and weaknesses were for that one student to see where they needed reinforcement, what they needed to relearn. It was very helpful. The assessments today, they get some descriptors back on the students. They do not get an actual diagnostic profile. You cannot use criterion referenced assessments in a diagnostic way. It is not possible. So that's super important to understand in state policy. I took way too long to say all that, but when we're looking at changing state policy, and right now, today, the graduation committee of the State Board of Education met this afternoon. Next week, they're going to vote on new graduation standards. It's a weird, confusing, inappropriate point system that we're going to have to undo after that policy is approved. You can begin communicating to the State Board of Education members tonight, this week, vote no on this system that they're developing for new graduation standards. But until we get back to using norm reference tests as some type of a tool, the testing companies are going to stop making them. The ACTs and the SATs are getting morphed into criterion reference assessments when they've in the past been norm referenced. That's going to be a shame, because what it will do is it will dumb down. Our remediation rates won't show when they go into college that they need more remediation, because the standards for getting into college are going to be brought down to here. Everything is coming down, folks. Everything is cascading down in terms of what's viable and what's good and what is makes people prepared to be successful in life.
Thank you. I want to thank our host and all of you for coming out tonight. We've been fighting this battle for a long time, and it's nice to see people in a room that want to learn and educate themselves. My name is Robert Coburn. I'm the president of the Garaway Local School District. We as a board have been dealing with Common Core since it came into play. More importantly, since I took on the board in January, we had 3 new electees. All came on board that have already done studies, as these ladies have, of what Common Core is. The problem that we found out was we really don't have local control at all. We are hamstringed, tied by what our legislators do in Columbus. As a board, we have 5 votes to get out of Common Core tomorrow and go back to other standards, but we can't do it. We can't do it. But I wanted to read real quickly why I ran. I'm here today as an elected official, but not because I want to be. I ran because I had to stand up for my family, my community, and those people that I care about the most in this district. And so, you know, I came to the realization that Washington legislators, and ultimately allowed by Ohio, are reaching down into our classroom, and what really got me the most was they're taking the data of our children without ever asking you. And you can, they reference some of the questions tonight that they're going to be asking our kids, but you cannot tell me that our gym classes that are going to be under Common Core are not going to be sharing health information on those same assessments. And if your child isn't as healthy as the state thinks they should be, well, maybe you need somebody to come into your home and tell you how to take care of your child. And that's what I did. But one of the statements that really resonated with me, I got many complaints from teachers in our district as well as residents of our district, but in my testimony, for House Bill 597 is on the back table. I'd love for you to pick it up and read it. But in that testimony, I say our teachers have estimated that 80% of the education conducted inside of the classroom is assessment-based education, with a percentage jumping to 100% a month or so before the actual assessment. We need to be in the business of creating great thinkers, but all we're doing with Common Core is creating good test takers.
At this time, we're going to go ahead and we'll have someone take the mic. I'll stand over here until they take the mic so we don't hear that any noise. And then we'll take questions until about 9 o'clock, I think that's roughly. Just out of respect for your time, formally dismissed at that point, but again, we'll be available for questions anytime after that as well. questions, if you want to raise your hand or stand up, and we'll make sure that the mic gets brought to you.
Thank you. I'm shocked by some of the things that I've seen here. I think initially it started out as some film that I thought was propaganda laced, but when you get into the heart of the discussion and start talking about sex education, the dumbing down and some of the hidden messages that seem to be maybe subliminal in nature, I feel like this is a good cause to ditch this program and ditch it quick. And so Andy, just some things, or whoever has the best answer for it. How much funding will be forfeited if we pull out the Common Core, and as a percentage of the overall budget for the state, how much is that? And then additionally, is the Senate on board, or likely on board for this? How much of a push is it going to take to get that over the edge? And then what about the governor and possible veto or signing of the bill?
Sure. I think it's a great question. One of the initial, I guess, boogeyman that was out there was somehow we're going to have to send back. We got $400 million under Race to the Top from the federal government, and the question was, we're going to have to find that money and send it back, and the answer is no. It was Race to the Top money. We fulfilled most of the requirements that were required under Race to the Top, so there's going to be no impact in terms of federal dollars. There's a question, obviously, concerned about money that's been spent to try to implement this, but again, I think if we're examining what we think is best for Ohio, we need to see if we can address that financial concern. One of the things that we created at the governor's program was a thing called the Straight A Fund, and that is millions of dollars that are available to go to school districts based on certain innovative programs that they're doing. I consider some of it to be kind of like Common Core hush money to go out there as well. But I think that monies that have been already appropriated could be looked at to help people that have some financial hardship associated with this transition period. And ultimately, as we talked about tax dollars, we want to fund something that makes sense. We want to fund something that teachers can embrace, that students can understand, that parents find is acceptable. And so that's what we're going to do in this equation. In terms of the Senate, I can't answer for the Senate, but I do think that citizen pressure and citizen input is very, very important. Politicians, above all, look at their elections and they look at whether that's that is threatened. Often it is in a primary scenario where they feel the greatest threat because a lot of the districts in Ohio are very safe seats. They don't face any real opposition, and so it's usually in the primary that someone will come along and say, I'm not happy with what's going on, and I'd like to offer different perspectives. So I think ultimately with the Senate, we hope that we set a good precedent with what we're doing in the Ohio House, that we can get it out of the Rules Committee, and then we'll vote for it probably in lame duck session, which would be in November. And if we have a favorable outcome, then it shifts to the Senate, and we'll see what they're doing. What I would like to encourage you to do, if you know your senator, is to encourage them to start now. To start thinking about doing the same thing that the Ohio House is doing in examining this process, because not a lot you don't have a lot of time between the 1st of November through the end of the year. And if we're going to save Ohio from Common Core, we need to take action as soon as possible. So I would encourage you, if you know your senators, to communicate with them. Ask for a meeting. Most representatives are back in their district right now, probably more accessible than normal. If they don't have a difficult campaign, they're probably available, and you should get in touch with them and share your perspective of what you've learned tonight. In terms of the governor, today he made a statement that I don't really know what this Common Core stuff really is all about. If anybody can show me that there's no local control, I'd be glad to reconsider my position. Well, I guess if he had been at the hearings, he would have heard what's going on here. And I understand that he's busy with a lot of topics, but I would like him to take this seriously. I know that when he's out around the state, he gets questions on Common Core all the time. And within the last month or so, he's really kind of trimmed his sails a little bit. And he said, if there's more that needs to be done, we'll take a look at it. And I think, again, I would like to think that citizen input matters. I know that he probably does not have a very difficult re-election at this point, but I would like that people who do have influence, who have been supporters of his in the past, or certainly people who know him or have a connection with him, will communicate to him how vitally important this is. Because again, there's nothing more important than we do in the state of Ohio than educate kids, because we're counting on them to build the bridges and build the rocket ships and you know, help us do right what we need to do in the future. And in order to do that, you need to have those critical thinking skills. You certainly need to get your math right. And so that's important to us. So again, thank you for that question.
There is a phrase in statute, I'm going to give you the reference number, it's 3301.07, paragraph D. And don't be impressed that I know that. I mean, I've looked at that. It's like knowing your phone number. It's not that impressive that I know that. 3301.07D. That's a paragraph that describes the duties of the State Board of Education in terms of developing standards, professional development, and all the different responsibilities the State Board of Education has. The very last phrase of that paragraph, and such other things that they deem necessary. That's a blank check. The governor has the authority, has the influence from one branch of it, because the State Board is quasi-legislative. They serve as a subsidiary of the Department of Education, and through the legislature, they're a rulemaking body. They don't write statutes. But that statute gives them extensive latitude to do whatever they want. So either that statute in 597 draws a line through that phrase. But for the time being, the governor needs to exert some time and effort into learning why this is a problem and re-influence the state board to go in a different direction. Because right now, the leadership of the board, which is strongly Republican, is very pro-Common Core. It's a wall that can't be breached at the moment, unless we get a different set of members on the board. So someone's going to have to influence the board to do something differently than what they're doing in terms of finalizing policy that is. Do you remember on the slide the going from 50 to 70%? Do you know what the standard is today for, like, for example, 6th grade reading or 7th grade math? It's in the low 30s range, 32, 35%. That's what the cutoff scores are now for the OAAs. So we haven't improved, and you know, when they're setting these cutoff scores, the board leadership at board meetings that I have been in are asked by board members, do we know what the cutoff scores are going to be for the park? No, because they haven't been set yet, to our knowledge. So that's a manipulative point in the system. They can make all these kids look like they're doing well with Common Core because you're going to get high scores, because the cutoff scores are going to be 30, 32. We don't have any control over that. So yes, the governor needs to have some influence, not just on the state board, but on the Senate. The Senate president needs to get phone calls and letters, not belligerent, you know, in-your-face type communications, respectful but firm. This is what we want as taxpayers.
The Times Reporter had an article on the Common Core about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they quoted our state representative, Alan Landis, as not having any information and not being able to cite a position. And our state representative, Alan Landis, is here, so I was wondering if you would be able to share his thoughts about what he thought about this program and let us know what he thinks about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address that question. The interviews are taken out of context. I don't know all the standards. I don't think there's anybody in this room who knows all the standards. That's what we're here to learn. That's why I'm here tonight, to listen and to learn more about what's going on with the Common Core, how much local control, how much parental control. That is very, very important to me. This morning, I put a 5-year-old on a school bus. I've got a vested interest in this, and I take it very seriously. I have the highest regards for Representative Thompson and his bill, and I'm waiting to see what the bill looks like when it comes out of committee and what we're going to vote on. And at that time is when I'll make my decision. But that's why I'm here tonight. I'm here to listen, and I'm here to learn. I'm to get educated on it. That's why I'm here. So I appreciate the information, and I certainly appreciate the question. Thank you.
I want to say something here. I'm from the Garaway School District. I have all my grandchildren in the Garaway School District. I helped at the school each year as my grandchild, when my grandchildren would go to the 2nd grade. And one year I went, and they no longer were teaching cursive writing. And I'm like, what? So do you know that for the last 3 grandchildren, I've had to teach them because they wanted to know how to write. I taught them how to do cursive writing the best way I could. And it's very upsetting to me, working within the school system, that is great, that I hear those teachers so frustrated. I'm up there trying to help them do basic reading. They don't have time to work with these children. And I'm not college educated, but the education I got from Garaway has carried me through for 16 years. I'm grateful, but at this rate, the distance between parent and child trying to help with homework is there. It's already there. And as a grandparent, I don't understand any of that. But I do understand my grandchildren want to learn the things that I know. So I'm hoping that I can help in some way. And I think this is a great effort on everyone's part to show that we are still Americans and we do have a say. But we have to be brave enough to do it. So thank you.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I thought it was an excellent job. And I just want to make a comment about Landis. I just want to thank him. He has met with me 2 different times on this subject, and he actually is the one that invited me to this meeting tonight. And I was able to invite a few people, so I just want to say thank you. I know he hasn't taken a position on it yet, but I do know that he has shown me that he's willing to learn. I gave him a huge binder of information yesterday, so I'm hopeful that he's going to read it.
Or else.
I just had a question for Andy Thompson. Question on, if we stay with Common Core, which I'm hoping we don't, but if that were the case, we stayed with Common Core, as new standards became available from the federal level, what approval process would they have to go through to be implemented in the state of Ohio?
I'm going to give you the best answer I can. I think the consortium really controls this process because fundamentally, these are standards that are copyrighted. And that was one of the greatest concerns that we have as state legislators. And it's kind of, to me, indicative that this is not some state-led program. Because if it were state-led, wouldn't the states have the ability to change and adapt these to their own needs? They don't. They're copyrighted. You can add 15%, as was noted earlier, but that 15% won't be on the test. So why would you bother? You know, you can tweak them and say, oh, you get all these chances to make them better. Well, not so much. And so that's why, again, we feel the federal government in the driver's seat here. And you saw one of the other things I want to point out is we weren't just viewing Ohio in a vacuum. This is a federal movement, right? Federal, I shouldn't say federal. A national effort to look at Common Core and consider repeal. And you hear Bobby Jindal talking about it now. He was formerly a proponent. Now he's realized that people are, mad as ever about this. And so we were looking at the examples of other states. We looked at Indiana. We saw Indiana repealed Common Core, but they didn't have anything else to put in its place. So when they sat down to write the standards, they ended up with virtually a milquetoast version of Common Core. So next up was Oklahoma. Oklahoma had a very effective repeal bill, and they were working with their standards which preceded that, and working on rewriting those. But again, they were threatened by the federal government. They were yanked their waiver for No Child Left Behind, and that happened within the last week or so. So again, you saw the heavy hand of the federal government coming into a state-led program and telling them that we're going to yank your waiver if you don't do exactly what we tell you to do. So I question the idea that this is state-led, state-controlled, state anything. It's really federally driven. Arnie Duncan has been the ringmaster. We're just circus animals down here jumping through the hoops. And so it's very disturbing in that sense, and we need to make that clear to people. We want that control back. And I would ask the local school districts, as Rob came up and testified, a lot of the superintendents who were marched forward by the proponents of Common Core said, don't give me local control. I don't want, it's like, we need Common Core because it's great. We don't have to worry about things, and I guess we can blame it on somebody else if things go down the tubes. However, it is going to go down the tubes because these things are not workable standards, and they have all the problems inherent that we learned about this evening. So I too am grateful. I mean, I'm a state legislator. I count on my colleagues to help me and back me up so that we can make this happen, but we also depend on folks like we have here tonight, Kelly and Ms. Fang, to help us multiply our impact. And you all in this room also have a role there too, as you communicate with friends and family. It can be overwhelming. I mean, we just sat through an excellent presentation. Maybe if you can put that out there. But social media is also a great source. And OhioansAgainstCommonCore.com is a great place to learn more information. There are clips coming out all the time. We had a wonderful article in the Washington Post this week from Dawn Neely Randall. And actually, as I was coming up here, I spent a half hour with her on the phone. She published in the Washington Post, I'm no longer going to want to subject my kids to this crazy testing. They asked her to write some more articles, and I think she's going to do an article on data mining of our children as well, which I think would be very illuminating to the people in Washington, D.C. who would impose this upon us. So we need moms to speak out. We need grandparents to speak out. We need teachers to speak out. And I know, and I was talking with this Ms. Randall, she said teachers are scared to death because their evaluations are going to be determining their pay and whether they continue on, and those evaluations are subject to a superintendent who might not be happy to have you speaking out against Common Core. So there are a lot of tripwires in there where you get in trouble if you don't say the right thing about Common Core. So we really need everyone else to help participate, and please support your teachers as they tell the truth about Common Core, because it really is not something that they're enjoying. And she's a courageous person. She's willing to come out and talk, and I think we will have her testimony down in Columbus. And I've asked her also to try to solicit other teachers who share her perspective so that we can get the truth out about this.
I just wanted to comment on what Patty said there, because she gave me a very large binder with a lot of information. It's going to require a lot of reading, a lot of time put into it. And my job requires a lot of reading skills. And that is courtesy of public education, Dover High, class of 73. I had teachers that were allowed to teach a subject. And if you look at the data that's supplied, that was pre-22 years ago. So again, teachers were allowed to teach, but one other component, and that's why you're here tonight, is parents were involved back then. And I'm glad to see so many people here tonight, because I think that's what's lacking in our school systems, is we send our kids to school and expect them to be educated. Like I said, I put my granddaughter on the bus this morning. I have a vested interest. And that's why you folks are here tonight. You have a vested interest, whether it's your child, your grandchild, your niece, nephew, or just a friend. We have to get back to the basics of being involved and speaking up and being allowed to have local control of our schools. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank Jenny for inviting me tonight. I have handed out plenty of the pamphlets that she had given me, and I have gone and talked to many of the people concerning this. A lot of times I hear, you're just upset because you're a pastor's wife and you're a Christian. That's a bunch of malarkey, all right? That has nothing to do with it. Now, I wish I would have had the information that I had today from my oldest, well, my youngest daughter, who is a senior this year. There's 4 years between her and my oldest. What she came home today with from English was nothing more than porn, and that's what she said to me. And when she did not want to participate in the discussion about oral sex and boy on boy and girl on girl in the classroom, the teacher told her that is because she's a Christian and she's in a minority now. Now, I have been on the internet, I have been on the phone, I have been door to door. What other way can we get this out that it's not about just being a Christian? Really, that is part of it for me, because I'm sorry, I don't believe that we should be teaching these. I don't care that she's almost 18. All right? And I don't care that it's typical in high school that all these kids are going out and having sex. I can tell you neither of mine did. Both my girls have not. But that's a personal choice on their part. But how else can we get it out there? Why is it not out there? Why are more people not standing up for this and speaking out? Any ideas?
I'll throw it to you.
In 1998, I was asked by a health teacher in Cincinnati to be a trainee in Tier 2 training that was federally funded for some sex ed materials. The CDC had put out 5 pieces of curricula to every state in the nation. Ohio chose 3 of the 5. For example, one was called Becoming Responsible Teens. The title sounded very innocuous. She said that there were 80 Tier 1 people, and each of them had to sign an agreement with the Department of Ed because they were getting federal monies to train 20 other people. She said, everything they've given us is filthy. I can't do this. So I'm going to pick 20 people that will fight it. So she trained 20 Melanies. And we went through all the materials. We made copies for legislators. We took what you just described in that book, Becoming a Responsible Teen, was homemade of that nature, that type of activity for 9 years old on up. Condoms for kindergartners. So you're asking, what do we do to get rid of this? I went to a legislator who's now serving in Congress, Jim Jordan. And I said, I showed him the materials, I showed him the teachers, I showed him the lessons for 9-year-olds to go to the store and buy condoms that were different colors and flavors and all of this. At the beginning of that manual, it said there were 3 instructional objectives, and I still have the book. And every time they bring up sex ed or health education state standards, I take my materials back. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. This is what it's going to look like in the classroom when you get done, and we kill the bill. Can't kill the bill if it's incorporated into Common Core. There's no bill to kill. But what Jim Jordan did, he said, well, what should we do? I said, it's federally funded. Can we freeze the use of the monies until there are public hearings in the legislature? Let's just shine a light on it and let people see what's in these books. In the context of those hearings, I thought the Department of Ed would want their money right away. I thought they were going to, this was December of '98. We didn't have public hearings until January of 2001. They drug their feet and drug their feet. I'm like, don't you guys want your money? We want these hearings, we want to get rid of this stuff. There was a young girl, an African-American girl from Cleveland who came down and testified. She was 19 years old. I got a call. It was a 2-day hearing. I got a call on Monday night to see if she should still come on Tuesday. I said, sure, let her tell her story. She was beauty pageant beautiful. I mean, she was very attractive, 19-year-old young woman. She looked at those legislators, and it was a joint committee of the House and Senate Education Committees. And she said, I want to know why, because I live in inner city Cleveland, I don't deserve the truth. I am 19 years old. I have 2 incurable diseases and a 6-year-old daughter. Hit the ball out of the park. So what happened with that is they sent back the money to the CDC. Ohio detached itself from the contracts, because we had all the contract language for legislators. The Department of Ed came out and tried to spin it, and they couldn't because we had contract language in our packets. Ohio took the money out of the bank and sent it back to the CDC. Sadly, we were the only state out of 50 states that did that. So that bought us time, because if 80 people times 20 is 1,600 trainers into all 600, at that time we had 611 school districts. So the answer to your question is, it's in the funding. Someone asked earlier, well, what will happen, how much the money, the strings are in the money. So we have to look at not just how much, but what kind of money are we using? You know, what on these funding streams, and they have allocated line items in the state budget. Next year is a budget year. We're going to get another round of federal funds with strings. We have to, because we are a sovereign state, we have to creatively develop state policy that cuts those strings when we can opt out and say no, thank you to that policy. So that's the answer, is the money streams.
Thank you. My name is Ira Wentworth. I'm the superintendent at Indian Valley Schools. And I just want to say how encouraging it is to see this many people out on a weeknight discussing education. Atypical, very atypical. Now, I understand, and I want to be very respectful, I absolutely do, of why you're here and your interest, and I applaud that. I too am a parent. I have 4 children. My senior, his name is, listen to the names, we chose them intentionally. His name is Samuel. I have a junior in high school, her name is Rachel. I have a sophomore in high school, her name is Ariel. And I have a 7th grader, his name is Noah. Personally, I'm very conservative, morally, politically. Happen to be, I'm not here to represent Yerkesville Christian Fellowship, but I am a deacon at our church. So I just say that with that in mind now. 21st year in education, yes ma'am. This is the system I know. It is. 21 years in education. 8 years as a high school math teacher. 11 years as a principal, both high school and elementary. And currently in my 2nd year as superintendent. During that time, I've got to mediate a lot of disputes. Children to children, teenagers to teenagers, and now adults to adults, right, Mr. Murphy? Sometimes we have to mediate it all. Here's what I would say. Understand that where you sit tonight is a very good presentation, but it's coming from a particular point of view. And I'm not here to try to convince you, persuade you to accept the Common Core, not at all. But I just want to point out in a balanced way, the same way that I mediate between interpersonal conflicts, whether with students or with adults, I tell kids when I work with them, there's usually 3 sides to the story. There's his side, there's her side, and then there's the truth that's probably somewhere in the middle. So just a couple of things that as I do have a question. I will get to the question. So just a couple of things that I heard tonight that I just want to point out are not really tied to the Common Core. There's problems in education. I won't dispute that. But just a couple items that teachers teach to the test. Their results are tied to their evaluation as part of an Ohio decision, unrelated to the Common Core. So that's a concern. There was a statement made about the ACT and the SAT, concern that it's becoming a K-12 measure. Actually, the ACT and the SAT are the most, over time, since the 60s, the most predictable and reliable measures of student achievement. The reason that is because higher ed needs a way to compare students that were admitted in college in the 1960s to who they're admitting today. So that's a fairly set standard. Concerns about cursive writing, I hear you, ma'am. I work with my 7th grader now to make sure he can write his name in cursive. But that exists since the early 2000s. It's not tied to the Common Core. Just keep that in mind. I fear that the Common Core would not allow our gifted children to perform at high levels. I talk to my teachers every day, and it's just the opposite of what I hear coming from the classroom. That the concern is, how can I get my gifted kids to these levels? Because they are rigorous. I heard tonight that the ability to communicate is not essential to mathematics. I won't go in depth, but as a former high school math teacher, that in my last 2 years of teaching AP calculus, we had a 100% passage rate. They needed to be able to communicate mathematics. That testing dumbs down students, if that is true, it's not tied to the Common Core. It's been since 94, 95 when we first implemented proficiency testing. Many teachers are home tonight working on their SLO assessments, like Mrs. Thompson. I understand that is a huge stress for our teachers, but it's not tied to the Common Core. That's an Ohio decision as part of our evaluation system that was adopted by our local controlled state government. And the idea that the percentage, it is disheartening sometimes to know the percent that a test, the passage rate, whether it's 50% as the cut score for a standardized test, it is disheartening. Those numbers come out as a result of the test being more referenced, just like the Iowa test of basic skills. And if we would evaluate data from tests like the Stanford Achievement Test or the Iowa test of basic skills, we would see that in the median, the top of the bell curve, is probably a similar percentage. So, but again, not related to the Common Core. So if we were to move away from the Common Core, my concern as a leader of a district of 1,900 students is I'm always vested in having them set up for success. I don't want to do anything that's going to put my kids at Indian Valley local schools in jeopardy of not being successful. Dedicated my life to them. So the question is, if we were to go to Massachusetts standards next year, I don't have time to prepare staff to get ready for new standards in just a few months. We've been working on the Common Core for 4 years. So are you, Representative Thompson, willing to sponsor a bill that would put a moratorium on testing until the new Ohio standards are developed, and so that the accountability system that's creating stress on teachers is on hold until we, in your words, would get the ship right? Are we willing to put testing on hold?
Thank you for your comments, and I appreciate that perspective. I'm actually revisiting a lot of my assumptions about the third grade reading guarantee and some of the other things that were done. And when I say I never insisted they were part of Common Core, they were various packages, and if you look at Jeb Bush's education reforms in Florida, these were all part of kind of a packaged approach to education reform. The third grade reading guarantee was not just in Ohio, it was like it was like a prepackaged thing that was sent to states and asked them to approve, and in many cases they were related to the waiver from No Child Left Behind. If you're going to continue to have that waiver, you have to have a teacher evaluation system. I think third grade reading guarantee was somewhat tied in with that as well. So while it was not part of Common Core, it was in a panoply of things as Race to the Top was happening and people were getting waivers for No Child Left Behind. And I don't want to bore people with too many technicalities, but I don't want to create a false impression either. When we talk about the problems in education, Common Core is a component, testing is a component, and over-testing is a component. And what's ironic to me is people who blasted No Child Left Behind as a terrible thing now say Common Core is great, and so that's confusing to me that the natural forces of opposition who would have risen up have been rather silenced on some of the concerns that we have here. I want the school districts to be successful. I want kids to be successful. That's part of the reason why I have concerns about what has been done here in our name but without our input. So that was really the concern about Common Core. I don't think any education reform has ever happened in Ohio without the vote, the input of the legislature, and I don't think that was an accident. We are 4 years into it, but why weren't people talking about it for 4 years? I mean, again, maybe it was happening in some of the school systems, but it doesn't seem like there was much of an effort to let parents know and participate and be aware of this until the last, I would say, maybe 18 months. But maybe not even that long, maybe the last year some memos went out to people saying this is the new system, this is what we're going to be doing, get used to it, et cetera, et cetera. And again, you're right, there's a certain perspective here. And I think it's a very well-informed perspective. What I learned in Columbus when we had the testimony was the other side, they had what they've been, they had learned and I guess had been informed to say. But they really didn't, they didn't address some of the major concerns that were raised, and I think we're still looking for answers. As I said, the Department of Ed declined to testify, although they've been intimately involved in all of this back to 2009, 2010. You couldn't get a straight answer about when this actually happened, when the hearings were supposed to be held, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just a lot of stuff that is murky, not available. Publicly has been held in confidentiality. So all that kind of stuff concerns people, I would say. And again, I realize it's not all part of Common Core, but I think Common Core is kind of the standards themselves are the driving factor here. Under Race to the Top, you had a series of things, a statewide longitudinal data system that was implemented, and that was to garner the data. You've got the park testing and the data mining that goes along with that. And I guess my question back to any superintendent is, are you comfortable with the data mining that's going to go on under park? Because we signed a memorandum of understanding under park that we would, two things. We would give them the data they required, and if Ohio law had to be changed to accommodate the data needs that they wanted, we would do that as well. That's very disturbing to me that we don't have any checks and balances there. We've got an agreement. So those are things that continue to concern me. I'm sorry for the long answer to your question, but again, each of us has kind of worked to try to get as well informed as we can.
Thank you so much for coming, for being a part of the forum in general. I would say we haven't been doing Common Core for 4 years. We've been doing the model for 21 years. It's the standards-based model. The only difference between Common Core and what we did in the mid-90s when we moved from the inputs-based system to an outcome-based system is the difference between that and Common Core is Common Core is nationalized. We don't control the list. Everything else has been, the model has been a Common Core type model for the last 2 decades. And the score standards have gone down in terms of the testing. We won't see change unless we change the model. That won't happen overnight. We didn't get it overnight. It's been a frog in the kettle for the last 2 decades. What I would like to see, what I think would be helpful in terms of alleviating the stress on the changing into a new standards to Massachusetts temporarily, it's just another list, but it's still a standards-based list. So what we need to do, I believe, is make the opportunities available for the norm reference as a test as a tool, and maybe in a toolbox, but as a tool. We need information that's transparent. For example, maybe we get a moratorium on the OTEDs and the results and the strings that get tied to teacher performance. We loosen that up first. Maybe in the context of doing that, we've created transparency that in the years that we're using the Massachusetts standards, or whatever list we end up, it's still going to be a standards-based list, we either put a moratorium on the report cards altogether, that's not tied to Common Core, but whatever we do in terms of testing, if we do a report card, make the score standards on the report card. So when parents say, my child is proficient, or the school district has got an excellent rating, what is that based on? No one knows right now that the score cutoff in math and reading is in the 30 percentile. So what we can do is make things more transparent. What happened when that potato farmer sued the state and the test questions became open public record? Incrementally, since that date, the department has lobbied and achieved in the state budget process language that makes less and less and less and less questions available for open public record. We can't see questions like this on the park, but they will be on there. If we had time, I would show you a PowerPoint that the department presented last year in this achievement committee, which talked about testing beyond academics and testing attitudes and behaviors and personality traits and all that in state testing. So all of that's in play with Common Core. And forget the first question, or the first part of what you were saying in terms of the system not being part of Common Core. I can't remember what the item was, but whatever it was in my mind, what it is a part of was the Race to the Top funding, which fueled Common Core. So there are more interlocking relationships between the pieces and parts, but the only difference, and the reason why I give a historical perspective, this is the model that we've been using for 2 decades. Common Core is just another version of it, and it's nationalized.
We have now come to about 20 minutes longer than what we said. And so, out of respect for your time, I would like to go ahead and formally dismiss, but I would like to encourage you, all of us are going to be available for questions. We are happy to stay as long as you need to answer your questions. And I would like to just reiterate the point that the superintendent made, and I would really like you to go home and do your own research. Find the stuff for yourself from the sources so you become familiar with the material. So you can come to your own decision on it, and then you will be informed enough to tell other people about it. With that, I would encourage you as you leave, we have some material to use as a reference guide for some of that on the table out there. We have the testimony that Mr. Coburn gave in front of the Ohio House regarding House Bill 597. And so I thank you all for coming. I thank you for your interest. I encourage you to do your own research and again to be available for questions as